Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Sargent. Welcome to my course, 101 Most Misunderstood Verses. We're coming to you today from Sacred Fire Church in Bellevue, Florida. Come on by. 101 Most Misunderstood Verses. Zipporah's raw deal. Does the circumcision scene reveal Zipporah's bad attitude? Have you ever seen anybody talk about Zipporah and not talk about her as a nasty, disagreeable, unlikable person? Right? You really see this made big in the Prince of Egypt. So the question is, why does everybody think that Zipporah is such a nasty person? What basis do we have for this? It is a very bad translation, bad understanding of the circumcision scene when Moses is confronted by God and he's returning to Egypt to be a deliverer for his people, but he has not circumcised his son. Now, to refuse to circumcise your son, this is going to become a very big deal because we're going to find out who are these Midianites that he's hanging around. And we're going to find out that they're circumcisers. They're not offended by circumcision. He didn't not circumcise the child because it would be offensive to the people he was with. They themselves were circumcisers. So here's a guy raised in the house of Egypt, probably embarrassed to have been circumcised among his playmates, because they would not be circumcised until they had their rite of passage as a teenager, right? And he has it early. So it probably was a source of ridicule simply because it was something that made him stand out. He was different, right? All right. This is Zipporah in the Prince of Egypt. Look at that. Take a look at her face. She spends a good portion of the movie angry, scowling, talking back, scoffing, generally showing contempt for those who are around her. She is an unrestrainable. They should have used her in The Taming of the Shrew, because this is the way that people see her. People project her this way. So why do they see her this way? So they misunderstand the scene in Exodus, and becomes the average reader is a lens through which every other text that involves her is read. She's an angry, nasty person in this scene, is the way she's perceived. Because she's an angry, nasty person, full of contempt for Moses, full of contempt for the things of Israel, disgusted even with this whole circumcision thing, we imagine that this is just her personality, this is what she's like. And so we use this as a lens to read her. And it all comes from her circumcision scene in Exodus 4. All right, translators have ignored alternate possibilities in terms and grammar. Translators have used their own culture as a basis for assessing the scene. So we have some translation issues that we're going to have to confront here. So let's go ahead and read the story. It's a really weird story. Exodus 4:22 through 23. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn, and I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son. Now let's jump to Exodus 4:24 through 26. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him, Moses, and sought to put him to death. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it and said, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. Now, other people actually translate it. She took the flint, cut off her son's foreskin, and threw it at Moses' feet. Some people they're going to translate it, threw it at Moses' feet, and said, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. So God let him alone, and it was then, at the moment that she said, you are a bridegroom of blood to me, because of the circumcision. All right, so we have this scene. Here it is. Moses is supposed to circumcise his son. He doesn't. He won't do it, probably because of his upbringing in Egypt. The Egyptians circumcised, but they didn't circumcise till their teen years. This was probably a source of a touchy situation for him. His own circumcision in infancy would have made him stand out in the courts among his friends, among the other princes, right? Probably a source of mockery and ridicule, because anything that stands out between kids, they seize on as an opportunity to ridicule. But he doesn't do it. But because the circumcision is the sign of the Abrahamic covenant, God is delivering the Hebrew people out of bondage in Egypt because of the Abrahamic covenant. He remembers Abraham. He remembers the covenant that he has with Abraham. So he's sending Moses to deliver them because of this covenant. But Moses is showing contempt for the covenant, for the circumcision, by refusing to circumcise his son. God's not having it. So he shows up and he is putting it to Moses. You're going to be a redeemer for the people of Israel, and yet you scorn the practices of the people of Israel. You scorn the practices of the Abrahamic covenant. I'm going to show you, right? I'm going to teach you a lesson. So Zipporah steps in, and she circumcises the child. And of course, what does she actually feel about it? We have to look at the language and the way it's being translated. This particular story has her as angry, disgusted, circumcising it. Ugh, gross. Throwing it at Moses' feet. Fine, you happy now? Looking at God. Fine, you happy? I did it, all right? Okay, it's taken care of. Goodness gracious, why are you being such a hard nose? Now, King James is even more aggressively translated. And it came to pass by the way in the inn that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone, cut off the foreskin of her son, and cast it at his feet, and said, "Surely a bloody husband art thou to me." So he let him go. When it was that she said, "A bloody husband thou art," because of the circumcision. That's an odd text. All right, so let's look at some other texts. So we have Exodus 18. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for all of Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Exodus 18:2 says, "Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her home, along with her 2 sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. And the name of the other was Eleazar, for he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh." All right, so we get this idea of that Moses was displeased with her and divorced her, this concept. All right, so we interpret Zipporah as a divorcee because she was such a difficult woman, obviously, because of the circumcision scene. We see her as a difficult woman, so we begin to interpret passages like this as if she's a difficult woman. So even though Moses welcomes them openly later when Jethro brings them back and calls her Moses' wife, we have this, some people have suggested this idea that Moses was a divorcee. I don't believe it. I believe that we're allowing the story of Zipporah and the circumcision and her supposedly bad attitude about it to color our reading of Zipporah in all the other texts. We know that in Numbers 13, we're going to get into it because Aaron and Miriam don't like his wife. Now, some people will try to suggest that this is another wife, a second wife, because he's supposedly divorced Zipporah. I'm not buying it. Right? She is a Midianite from this particular region. I believe that they're actually talking about her. They don't like people from foreign cultures. They don't do things right. They don't act the same way. They are incredibly offensive when they're not. It's so easy when you put people from different cultures together for there to be an unprecedented amount of conflict, because everything about the way you do life is different. Everything, marriages from 2 different cultures can be very difficult because there's a lot of unnecessary offense or frustration. You don't value the same things. You don't do things the same way. You don't think the same way about circumstances in life, and it creates a lot of tension here. All right, but we've got Moses welcoming her, so he sent her away, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he divorced her, because later Jethro brings her back, and he's actually very happy to see them and has a decent relationship with Jethro. Exodus 18. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped on the Mount of God. And when he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him, and they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. All right. They interpret the confusion in Numbers 12 in the worst light. Oh, I said 13. Here's chapter 12. Being biased against Zipporah, the Cushite wife of Moses, must be a second wife after disposing of Zipporah, the nasty, unsupportive hothead. Though, since Miriam was angry with this Cushite, they are willing to consider it being Zipporah. Because they're mad at her. Well, maybe it was Zipporah because, Zipporah is such a terrible person, so it would be perfectly fair for them. Now, in Numbers 12:1, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken also through us? And the Lord heard it. So there's some debate even among the Jews as to the exact identification of people with labels like Midianite, Cushite. This could be Zipporah. This could be a second wife. This could be a replacement wife after Zipporah's death. Okay. Moses lives a very long life. So we're not 100% sure who this Cushite woman is, but it could be Zipporah. And some scholars are only willing to entertain the idea that it's Zipporah because everyone's mad at her. All right. All right, so here's what we got. So we got this first word here, all right? Like tikkak, all right? Like tikkak. That means, and she took Zipporah. Zipporah took. Remember, you start with the verbs, and then you move to the subject. And she took Zipporah. Zipporah took tzor, a flint, and she cut. All right? And she cut. Again, we got the sign of the direct object. What did she cut? She cut the foreskin. All right? Arlat. The foreskin of her son. The foreskin of her son. All right. Now let's move on. Now here we have the word through, but we also have the word touch. Right? She touched to his feet. Now remember we said that we have euphemisms for the genitalia. This is a euphemism for genitalia. So she either threw it at Moses' feet, because it just says at his feet. Who's the him? So this last word right here, this is his feet. So she touched it or she threw it to, this is the word to, feet, to his feet. All right? So, whose feet? It doesn't say touch it to Moses' feet. Some translations actually stick the word Moses in there. The word Moses is not in there. She touched it to his feet, and which is also a euphemism for genitalia. Okay? Just get used to that. They've got a lot of different euphemisms for genitalia. Today they seem to be coming up a lot. Mm-hmm. And she said, key. It's that. And she said. Now I'm going to tell you what she said. A bridegroom. This word bridegroom is not just a husband. It's also a relative of through covenant, a covenant bond, a covenant relationship, like a husband relationship. But it can also be the son. You are a relative, damim, of shed blood. You are a relative of shed blood. You are to me. And she said, here's what she said, a bridegroom of shed blood you are to me. And all right, let's imagine this scene here. One scene, she does the circumcision. She's disgusted by it. She takes the foreskin. She throws it at Moses, throws it at his feet. You're a disgusting, bloody husband to me. Let's try it again. She, the priest, the daughter of a Midianite priest, circumcises the child, takes the foreskin, touches it to his genitals, and makes a pronouncement over him. Thou art a relative of blood to me.
That makes more sense.
Yeah. Now we've got a right. Now we've got a right of bonding, a covenant right. You are now part of the covenant with me. You are now brought in. Because what is the circumcision? The circumcision is an entrance into the covenant. You're the child. You are brought into the covenant. Moses has neglected to do this. Now the question is, were the Midianites disgusted by circumcision? We've already said that the Egyptians did circumcision, but they did it as part of a rite of passage into puberty. Right? But what about the Midianites? Would she, as the priest's daughter, be disgusted by this circumcision? No, absolutely not. The Midianites are circumcised. All right. So here we've got, this is a piece from a lexicon, and it can be a son-in-law. The word can mean a son-in-law. See here. The word can mean a bridegroom, right? Like the husband you're getting married. And the word can mean a child to be circumcised. It can also be used to mean a father-in-law, a brother-in-law, right? We've got all these different uses for the word. But one of the uses is a child to be circumcised. All right? This is the covenant bond. You're not just, right? So it says, one who by marriage, as a daughter's husband or brother-in-law, has become a relative to another man in his family and enjoys their protection. It's a coming under the covenant protection, coming into the covenant bond, being connected through covenant. This word is often used. All right, connection with circumcision as original puberty practice. That this is not an uncommon thing, this thing that she calls him, right? This bridegroom. So it's not just a husband. It can also be a person who is a bonded covenant relative. You've gone from being my flesh and blood, you're now bounded to me within the covenant, right? So we have this possibility in the meaning of the term. All right, possibility one. So here are possible. So Zipporah does the dirty deed of circumcision. She's disgusted. She shows contempt for Moses by throwing the foreskin at him and degrading him and their relationship. Or two, Zipporah performs a ritual over her son, makes ritual pronouncements, and saves her husband's life when he shows contempt for the practice of circumcision. Radically different interpretations. Here Zipporah becomes a hero. Here Zipporah becomes the person who, in a fearful situation of God coming in judgment against Moses because of his contempt that he's shown over circumcision, no doubt because of his own history with it in the royal house. All right, now for some, the odd thing here is that Yahweh intercepts Moses on his way to fulfill command simply because he hasn't circumcised his son. So a lot of people are like, this is really weird. It seems a little weird, but it is not surprising. Covenant signs are a big deal. Anything that's a covenant sign. The way you treat the covenant sign is the way you treat the covenant. If you are dismissive of the covenant sign, you're dismissive of the covenant. Well, how do we feel when people take our flags and burn them? Or throw them on the ground and stamp on them? What if somebody urinated on an American flag? How many Americans would be highly offended, very angry at this breach? Well, why? It's just a piece of cloth. It's not just a piece of cloth. It's the sign, it's the emblem, it's the symbol of our nation. It's the embodiment of who we are as a unified people. Well, in the same way, the Sabbath is the sign of the Mosaic covenant. This is why the Sabbath is such a big deal in Scripture. To defy the Sabbath, to show contempt for the Sabbath, is to show contempt for the covenant. So, what about a wedding ring? I used to wear one. I don't have one anymore because I did construction. I was always afraid it's going to rip my finger off, so I wouldn't wear it by day. I would often put it on by night, but I got out of the habit. And but if I had this wedding ring, and I wanted to show contempt for my marriage, take the ring off, throw it in the ocean, take my ring off, spit on it, spit on the ring. I'm not spitting on a ring, a piece of gold. It's just a piece of gold, but it's a symbol of the relationship. So I had a friend of mine who was dating this girl, and she wanted to break off the engagement, and so they're going for a walk, and they're going over this bridge, over a pond, an old mucky pond, and they're meeting halfway at the very arc of the bridge. It's so beautiful. He gazes into her eyes. She holds up her hand, plucks off the engagement ring, 2 carats, as I understand, and threw it into the pond. That was not just a breakup. That was utter and complete contempt for the entire relationship. Bad stuff. Right. Had another friend happen to him. They owned some property. They were walking down by the property, and it turns out his wife was cheating on him with his best friend, and she took the ring off and threw it at his feet, and turned around, got into his friend's truck, and drove away. Never saw her again. So circumcision is the sign of the Abrahamic covenant. To refuse to do it. So he is the deliverer sent because of the covenant, but he is showing contempt for the sign of the covenant. Bad. No good. Can't do that. When he is in the basket and the Pharaoh's wife recognizes him as one of the Hebrew children, it's not because he's got a Hebrew blanket. Now I recognize you're making a movie for kids when you make The Prince of Egypt, and kids are going to be watching it, so you don't want to sit there and go, oh, look, he's circumcised. This is a Hebrew baby. Because the Hebrews circumcised at 8 days. The Egyptians didn't circumcise until puberty. So in Prince of Egypt, it's like, oh, a Hebrew blanket. This must be a Hebrew child. Yeah. So the situation here is serious from a covenantal perspective. Moses has refused to fulfill his Hebrew duties for a covenant sign under Abraham. And yet, he is circumcised. Right? He is known instantly as a Hebrew boy by Pharaoh's daughter, not by some blanket in his basket, but because he's circumcised. Circumcision was inconsistently practiced among the Egyptians, but often as a rite of passage into adulthood, not as a baby rite. But now let's talk about the Midianites. What about the Midianites? While there was some debate, the Midianites appear to be the children of Abraham through Keturah. And if they're the children of Abraham through Keturah, what are they practicing?
Circumcision.
Child circumcision.
Absolutely.
Infant circumcision. So let's go ahead and read it. Genesis 25, 1-6. Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. But to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts. And while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. Now, if this accounts for those called by this man's name, then their numbers would be akin to those of Israel, being a people about the same length of time. So the Midianites are going to equal the people of Israel in size. So now up here is the map, is Goshen, which is where the Israelites are living. This is where the Midianites are originally from. But there's a tension between the label Midian with caravan traders, pagan worshippers closely associated with Moab and Ishmaelites, and certain land designations. So this is a hazy kind of people. Who are we dealing with here? Who are these people that Moses is with? Right? So Moses has a covenant of peace with Jethro, but swears everlasting war with Midian after the incident with Balaam and the smearing of the tribal leader's daughter. Are we familiar with the story?
No.
All right, so basically Balaam is called upon by the king of Midian to come and curse the Israelites, and he's supposed to be a man of great spiritual power, and he says he won't do it because God's called to bless them. Then they come back and offer him more money, so Balaam's like, ooh, well, that's an offer. Well, let me ask God again. God's like, did I say the first time don't do it, they'll up their offer? Or did I say I'm blessing them? So he's like, oh, you're determined to go. You come back to ask me again. Fine, go. But then he sends the angel of the Lord to try and kill Balaam. So Balaam is sent to go and to do this curse, but instead of doing the curse, he blesses them. And he actually gives one of the great messianic prophecies. I see a star rising, right? Oh, great passage. All right, so, but what the king does is, because he can't get this guy to curse the Israelites, is he sends women among them to seduce them. To seduce them into, they use the erotic practices of pagan worship to seduce some of the Israelites into participating in this. And this is the whole scene where the people are running amok, and God strikes the people with a plague, and it begins to spread through, and people are dying, and it's because of this wickedness. Aaron's son Phinehas grabs up a spear and follows one of the leaders of Israelite, where he brings this girl into his tent with his family, with his wives and children, and starts having sex with her on the floor of the tent in front of his wives and children. And Phinehas storms into the tent and pins them both to the ground, spears them right through, both of them, him on top of her, spears them to the ground, and God checks the plague and checks this immoral behavior. We actually ministered in a church in Onset, Massachusetts, that was next to a Spiritist church. And the pastor that I was working with was the first pastor since the early 60s that had not fallen sexually to one of the women from this church, because they were constantly sending women from the Spiritist church to seduce the pastors of this church. They would work them and work them and work them and try and do all kinds of things to try and get them to stumble. So this is what Midian does. If he can't get a curse against them from Balaam, then he's going to lure them with sexual delights to try and get them to break their covenant and to do them harm. And so God swears war with them. All right. Now, of particular interest is the general practice of circumcision, coming not only from Abraham to his children, but generally in the Palestinian region. All right. So let's read this little bit of an article about the Midianites. In the Hebrew Bible, Midianite, in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, it's a member of a group of nomadic tribes related to the Israelites, and most likely living east of the Gulf of Aqaba, in the northwestern regions of the Arabian Desert. They engaged in pastoral pursuits, caravan trading, and banditry, and their main contacts with the Israelites were from the period of the Exodus, 13th century BCE, through the period of the Judges, 12th to 11th century BCE. According to the book of Judges, the Israelite chieftain Gideon drove the Midianites into western Palestine, after which they largely disappeared from the biblical narrative. According to the book of Genesis, the Midianites were descended from Midian, who was the son of the Hebrew patriarch Abraham, by the latter's second wife Keturah. Jethro, priest leader of the Midianite subtribe known as the Kenites. But we know that the Midianites were practicing circumcision. Abraham was practicing circumcision. And so the question comes to us, does the daughter of a priest, of circumcisers, find herself disgusted by a common practice?
No.
So you're a priest's daughter among a circumcising family. Are you disgusted? No. This is old hat. So she does the circumcision. And I see her doing a ritual. She circumcises the child, she takes the foreskin, she touches it to his genitals, and she makes a religious pronouncement over him. Thou art a relative, a covenant relative of blood to me. You've been welcomed into the family, welcomed to the
Do they still do that during modern circumcisions where they take that and touch it to the genitals?
Well, no, we're dealing with a Midianite,
Okay.
with a kind of a Midianite
Okay, so
type of thing.
The Israelites didn't.
Well, we don't have any record that they necessarily pronounced that. There are some people that actually do this that might be able to shed more light on it. We don't have any of the specific scenes. This is the only circumcision scene we have, other than
Them talking about it.
them talking about
Okay.
that it was done. So Abraham was circumcised. He was circumcised.
Mm-hmm.
This is the one picture of an actual circumcision that we're given.
Mm-hmm.
And she steps in. So her practices of it might be a little different. What she's not is disgusted.
Mm-hmm.
What she's not is angry. What she is a saving figure.
Mm.
She gets a raw deal. She deserves credit. She deserves praise for stepping in. Even when Moses failed, she succeeded, and she ended up being a great help to him, not a hurt to him. And to the fact that this scene being misinterpreted, being mistranslated, misunderstood, that it's become a source of scorning her throughout the scriptures in every place that she appears, using this scene as a lens. We got the wrong lens on this lady. All right, so what does Zipporah's scene actually show us? An easily angered, contemptuous woman disgusted with her foreign husband and his foreign religious practices? Or a loving wife protecting her husband from his own snobbish, quote, question mark, snobbish, rebellious choices, permitting him to fulfill his calling by Yahweh? I think it's important to put her right and to get her right. And I'll interpret her the second way every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you what, there'd be a lot fewer righteous men of God if they didn't have righteous wives to keep them stable,
Oh, I
keep them,
completely
to
agree
hold
with
them
that.
accountable,
Keep them on the path.
keep them on the path,
Mm-hmm.
to recognize to protect them from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
If not always in what they eat, right? I mean, what's the big thing? Wives come along. You shouldn't be eating that. You shouldn't be having that. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? It can get really annoying to men, but God bless them. God bless the ladies. One of the big themes, like when you read Gilgamesh, is you've got this friend of Gilgamesh, and I'm struggling for his name off the top of my head right now, where he's a wild barbarian of a man, and Gilgamesh goes out to fight with him, and he can't conquer him. He can't beat him. And this Gilgamesh is not used to finding somebody that he can't conquer in a fight, so he's very upset. So he decides what he needs to do, hires this woman to go out and seduce him, and to become, and what she does is she tames him. She tames him. She makes him civilized. Women civilize men. Women make us cleaner. They make us better.
If it's a good woman.
Yeah.
If it's a
It
good
could
woman.
be
If
the
it's a good
opposite.
woman. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can be it could be the opposite. But on the whole, the male tendency to be rough, tumble, and walking in the house with the boots on, being rough on things. They look at a room and they go, it looks perfectly clean. And the place got dirt everywhere. There's an element of this of what the woman does for the wife, and I think we see Zipporah playing her role, saving Moses from himself, from his own snobbishness, from his own stubbornness, to help him achieve the calling that's on his life. If you like what you're hearing today, please subscribe below, and don't forget to share it on as many platforms as you can, and tell your friends to watch. Thank you.